and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today is Testosterone Tuesday. Occasionally, I get the urge to cover a man, but that's not really my brand, so I've decided to do Testosterone Tuesday and talk about how the women in their lives helped to shape these men. My first subject is going to be King Henry VIII. Prince Harry was born in 1491. He was his father's spare, as he had an older brother. Because he was a spare, he spent a lot of time with the women in his life. His father was training his older brother to be king. The first woman of note in his life was his mother, Elizabeth of York, Queen of England. Elizabeth had been born a princess of England, the oldest daughter of King Edward IV and his wife, Elizabeth Woodville. After her father died and her brothers went missing, possibly at the hands of their uncle Richard, who became the new king, Elizabeth was at court with her uncle for a while, but it had to be uncomfortable knowing about her missing brothers. There was potentially a deal made between Elizabeth's mother and Margaret Beaufort, that Margaret's son would invade with his French army, and if he conquered King Richard III, Elizabeth would marry Margaret Beaufort's son, Henry Tudor. Henry invaded and killed King Richard, so Elizabeth married Henry Tudor, the new King Henry VII of England. Marrying the man who just killed your uncle had to be awkward. They didn't even know each other, but the uncle he killed was possibly responsible for the MIA status of her brothers, so it's complicated. They do seem to eventually have fallen in love. There is some thought that by having his children, she became a Tudor, knowing that her husband's security on the throne kept her children safe, but also that she may have been raising her children to be in part Yorks. They were both Yorks and Lancastrians, and that seemed to heal some of the strife caused by the Civil War. While Henry's older brother spent a lot of time with his father, Prince Harry spent a lot of time with his mother and his sisters. It is safe to say that in his young life, he was raised mostly as a York prince. His brother Arthur was the Tudor prince. Prince Harry was close with his mother, and he seems to have idealized her as the perfect queen. And it seems like that is where he started to build his belief about how a queen was supposed to be. She was a sweet queen who lived for her husband and her children, and did her duty of having many children, both boys and girls. At first, Henry was in the royal nursery with his older sister Margaret. Princess Margaret was a year and a half older than Prince Harry. They were close as children. In 1502, Prince Harry's sister Margaret became legally the Queen of Scotland. She was 12, and Prince Harry was about 11. And as the Queen of Scotland, she outranked her brother at English court. And she was still at English court. Both her mother and her grandmother were opposed to her leaving for Scotland at such a young age to a husband in his 20s. This was a tough time in the relationship between Prince Harry and his older sister Margaret. He hated that she outranked him, and she loved it. She made sure she entered rooms before him as often as possible, because she was, after all, a queen, and he was just a spare. In later life, he cared a great deal about rank, and when he was eventually king, he expected everyone to follow the proper protocol and respect. Decades later, when Margaret was up in Scotland with her husband invaded England, and Margaret's husband was killed by the English army. And this somewhat feels like a continuation of their childhood rivalry. When Prince Harry was about 1 year old, his mother had her fourth baby, Princess Elizabeth. Princess Elizabeth didn't live long. She died at the age of just 3, when Harry was just 4 years old. He was young, but this probably showed him that losing children was a part of living during this time. This was why he was needed as spare, because at any moment someone could fall sick and die. This probably brought him closer to his mother as she was mourning the death of her youngest baby. Harry's parents went right back to work having babies, and the year after little Elizabeth died, when Henry was 5, his mother had another baby, Princess Mary. Mary was definitely a junior member of this sibling group. She wasn't a queen. She was just a little sister, and the only sibling that Harry, as an older boy, outranked. He was the boss. Mary had to respect his wishes, and that was their dynamic. When Prince Harry became King Henry VIII, Mary was his only unmarried sister. And, as her brother and king, Henry was responsible for picking her spouse. He chose for his teenage sister 52-year-old King Louis XII of France. This showed that he probably didn't care so much what Mary thought. This was an alliance marriage, a young wife for an aging French king. Mary was sent rather unhappily to France to marry her much older husband. They were married, and the older king died just a couple of months later. So Queen Mary of France was now an 18-year-old dowager queen. It seems like Mary thought she had done her duty to the crown, and now it was up to her as dowager queen to find her own second husband. King Henry sent his best friend Charles Brandon to pick up his little sister from France. Mary and Charles decided to run off together and elope. They may have thought Henry would be okay with his best friend marrying his sister, but he wasn't. If you remember, he was way into rank and protocol, and neither his sister or his best friend had asked his permission. And this was the sister that usually listened to him and respected his wishes. King Henry banished his sister and his best friend from court. He didn't want to see them if he wasn't being shown the proper respect. Princess Mary turned Queen Mary turned Duchess died, probably of tuberculosis, at the age of 37, having never really reconciled with her older brother, 42-year-old King Henry. This was one of the first times Henry had decided that he could exile people from his presence, even loved ones, for not respecting his position as king. He was still very much the stubborn little boy he had always been. Another very important woman in Prince Harry's life was his grandmother, Margaret Beaufort, his father's mother. When he was about 7 or 8, plans started being made for Prince Harry to enter the church. His brother was getting older, and it looked like the spare wouldn't be needed to be king. His grandmother was put in charge of his godly education. He started spending a lot of time with her on religious pilgrimages and visiting various houses of worship. During this time, he would have received the message that he was God's chosen. He was meant for the church, and it was meant for him. The English royal family still believed in the divine right of kings. God had placed him in this family for a reason. And Henry had been put here to be the religious man of the family. And with any luck, he may someday be Pope. This only lasted a few years. When Henry was only 11 years old, his brother, the Prince of Wales, died, and Prince Henry's life shifted course. He was no longer the spare. He was the heir to the throne of England. His grandmother supported this change in his future because she didn't really have a choice. Harry was the last remaining male heir in the family. He stayed close to his grandmother, and that closeness only got more intense the following year when Queen Elizabeth died, having another baby, Princess Catherine, who also died. Losing his mother and another baby sister would have been difficult on Prince Harry. His father was overcome with grief, and Prince Harry relied heavily on his grandmother for emotional support. When Prince Harry was 17 years old, his father also died, making Prince Harry King Henry VIII. His grandmother helped the young King Henry ascend the throne and get married to the Spanish Princess Catherine of Aragon. Lady Margaret Beaufort helped him plan the coronation and then died of an illness she had picked up around the time of his coronation. His grandmother had always been very religious and devoted her life first to God and then to her family. She was to King Henry the perfect grandmother in every way, strict but loving. When Prince Harry was about 10 years old, he met his future wife, Catherine of Aragon, but he was meeting her as his brother's betrothed. It was 10-year-old Henry's job to walk through London with his brother's betrothed on their wedding progress through the city. He was quite the entertaining showman. He probably started realizing that he liked being the center of attention right about now, and he was good at it. He was very charming. His brother did marry that Spanish princess, but then he died of an illness just months later. This meant Catherine was a dowager princess, and Prince Harry was heir to the throne. He had to shift his life focus from God to England, and he would need a queen, a very different life from the celibate church life he had been preparing for. And Dowager Princess Catherine at 16 was his perfect idea of a godly queen. His mother and his grandmother were both quite fond of her. She was the perfect amount of Catholic. The year after the death of his brother, his mother also died, and his father was devastated, and his grandmother was holding it all together. There was a disagreement over the princess's dowry. It hadn't been paid in full before she was widowed, and there had been some dispute over it being paid or her returning to Spain. There was also some dispute over if the princess was still a virgin. She had been married for months, but she claimed she was still a virgin. This could have been true, but it also could have been what she thought needed to be said for her to get a second chance at a high-ranking husband. The disagreement over finances continued through the rest of King Henry's life. But when he died, Prince Harry jumped at the opportunity. He married his brother's widow, and just after their wedding, Henry's grandmother died. This left Catherine as Henry's only real support system. She became his whole life. And that is where I'll leave it for now. What did you think of our very first Testosterone Tuesday, King Henry VIII? I know I still spoke a lot about the ladies, but I think all of them played a huge role in shaping the man King Henry became. And they all have their own episodes, so for the extended versions of those, check those episodes out. And for an extended version of this episode, you can come join us on Patreon, where they get extended episodes and extra content. The link is in the show description. Shout out to the 10% of my audience that is male. You guys keep listening, even though I just now finally got around to talking about a man. You guys are the best. Long live to all the queens out there, and until next time, bye.
Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.